I'm Todd Jones, recovering from 30 years as a sports writer. Thanks for joining me as I sit down with some of the best sports writers of our time, who knew the greatest athletes and coaches and experienced firsthand some of the biggest sports moments of the past half century. We'll share stories behind the stories, some we've only told each other. Pull up a seat on Press Box Access. He's been called the quintessential American sports writer. He's been writing about the NBA for more than 50 years. That's 50, 5-0. He's an icon in Boston and a longtime national voice of wisdom on the ESPN shows Around the Horn and Pardon the Interruption. He is Bob Ryan, and he's kind and generous enough to share stories with us on Press Box Access. Well, Bob, thanks a lot for joining us on the show.
You're welcome. Nice to be here, as they say.
Yeah, so, the only thing I was thinking, I wish we were at the Fours in Boston.
I'm sad already because it's closed, and
yeah.
I have very, very fond memories of it, of course, and not just it's so symptomatic of what's going on with the country. Hardly the only failed business or the only casualty of all this, but this one hurts home for me. Yes. Yeah, the Fours is a great watering hole across from the old Garden, and a lot of world's problems were solved by sports writers in the Fours. So, and by the way, as we get started here, we got a lot to cover, but I hear you're a good tap dancer. Is that right? Well, I don't know how good I am now, but I can tell you right now that I was the best damn tap dancer in the North Trenton Little League and the Trenton PAL Little League the year after that.
Well, you're a better rider than me, and I'm sure you were a better dancer because, I was just known for the white man overbite, the lawnmower, the sprinkler, not a tap dancer. But
yeah, I had the opportunity to be trained, and I actually, performed with groups and enjoyed it. So that was a part of my youth.
Well, you were tapping on the keyboard for 50 years now and seen so many amazing things in sports. Obviously, you saw the whole evolution of the NBA, the growth, and then the Olympics, baseball, golf, you name it, you've covered it. So we got a lot of ground to cover. I think it would be great to start. We're going to talk about a lot of people, but one thing I wanted to ask you about was the old Boston Garden itself.
It was modeled after the not the original, but the second Madison Square Garden, the one that older people know, the one at 48th and 8th in New York that lasted until 1968. That's the one I grew up on. You needed poles in those days, and when you had poles and both in indoor arenas and outdoor stadia, meant you could have better proximity to the action.
Right.
Having them set back. That's just why there is no baseball park today that has a view comparable to Tiger Stadium. You were right there on top of the action. And of course, when I first started going there, they were literally smoke-filled.
Right, exactly, right.
There were no smoking restrictions. It was a far more smoking society. That was part of this, and of course, each featured an organ. That was the musical background. And in Boston, the most famous named guy was John Kiley, who famously played at Fenway Park and Boston Garden. So there was an intimacy. There was a charm. There was it wasn't a feel for comfort, at all. Good wooden seats. I got my old last seats from the building, or I have. Literally have the right ones too. We were able to pick out the seats before they demolished the building. Had a charm that are not possible to replicate.
Yeah, when I was at the Cincinnati Post in the early 90s covering college basketball, Xavier played at the Cincinnati Gardens. And it was the same thing, just an old building. And they would turn the lights off except for the lights above the court. And it looked like a stage. And your feet would stick to the floor because of the spilled beer.
Oh, yeah.
And there was cigar smoke. And it just had a much different feel to it.
Yeah, no, it was totally different. And I was in that building once, my first year covering the league. The Royals, well, actually the second year, 70, 71, they were still in Cincinnati. They had yet to relocate to Kansas City and Omaha, as you know. And I was in there once. So I'm glad to say I was able to do that. I missed a couple of the old baseball parts that killed me. I never got to Forbes Field. I never got to Griffith Stadium. I never got to Crossley Field. Those are three that I wish I had gotten to.
One more thing about the Garden. The parquet floor became like its own, it had its own fame.
Yeah.
Was the floor really were there dead spots like everybody said?
There's a exaggeration that takes place. I do believe that it's probably true. There were certain deader spots than others, but it wasn't bad enough that you would put the ball down and it wouldn't come back up. Some of the stories people tell about that. And the mythology is that the Celtics knew where the dead spots were and could steer ball handlers to it. Nonsense, come on. But there was something to it. But it was made out of extra spare parts, spare wood. That was the thing. It was made out of originally out of wood. I mean, it was out of wood, but spare wood, and put together in that fashion and in that parquet fashion. And so when they moved to the new garden, they wanted to replicate the look. It was a tougher place to do business as time went on. The garden, I can understand that. And I understood that the time had come that we needed the city needed a better facility. But boy, I mourned it. I missed it, and I'm very happy to say that the night of the last game that was played there, which was Orlando beating the Celtics in 1995 playoffs, the last game, I had brought my ticket stub from my first visit there, which was on October 17th, 1964, on a Saturday night. And I always carried that ticket stub, or I had it. And I brought it in, and I asked the Globe photographer on duty that night, would he mind taking me my picture as I sit in that seat while they were taking up the floor for the final time ever.
Oh, that's awesome.
And when I first started going to the garden as a student at Boston College, we sat in the second balcony for $2. And wow. So your night would be 25 cents on the T to go from BC on the Green Line to downtown to North Station, and then walk in, and $2 second balcony seats. And of course, we always, not always, you usually wanted to go for double headers as soon as you have those double headers. So one night, in fact, the first game was 76ers versus the expansion Supersonics, and Wilt set a record that still stands. And this is not hyperbole. This is the gospel truth. Still record, and I predict it will never be broken. And this is most free throws missed in one game.
How many?
22. He was 8 for 30 that night from the line, but he had 22 field goals. So he had 52 points while missing 22 free throws. I don't think that anyone's going to challenge that.
That's a great stat. There's so many with Chamberlain. That's amazing. You spent thousands of nights in the garden, but really your sports writing career began when you were 11 years old. You wrote for the Sportster.
I called it. I wrote a column. I typed out a column, emulating what I had been reading in the paper, that the way to do it. And the column basically was an evaluation or observation on what was going on in the grammar school basketball league that I was playing in, and for St. Joseph's School, the Trenton Parochial Basketball League, and also some observations on the larger world, including the Boston Celtics. And I believe, I'm sure Bob Cousy would be proud to know that I quote, and I should quote, Cousy quarterbacks this club masterfully. And I'm sure he would have appreciated that compliment from the kid in Trenton, New Jersey.
Well, how did you critique your own play if you were playing in the league?
Well, I was, my game never changed from the time I started playing, which was I was a scorer who disdained defense and rebounded on very rare occasions. And that was my game. I had it for years, but somewhere along the way, in the midst of moving, I finally lost it. I would have loved to have kept that, had that keepsake. But
I'm always curious about where writers start. Sports has always been such a part of your life. I know. So you go to Boston College, you intern at the Boston Globe in 1968 with some guy named Peter Gammons.
Yeah, well, I lost track of him.
Only one of the great, if not the greatest baseball writer ever. So you show up in 1968 with Gammons at the Globe, and next thing you know, a year later, you get hired full-time, and they put you on the Boston Celtics beat in October of 69. The Celtics had just won their 11th championship in 13 years. Bill Russell had just retired. You're 23 years old. You're on the Celtics beat. What the hell was that like?
Overwhelming. I knew I could write a game story. I figured that, and I could. But there's no manual that teaches anyone how to cover a team. There's no manual. That is the ultimate OJT. And I'm 23, and I was thrown into this on a Wednesday, and it was, oh, by the way, you're covering the game opening night Friday. And I had not gone to any exhibitions. They had a new coach, Tom Heinsohn. I hadn't met him. Hadn't met anybody. The first time I met anybody was when I, encountered people the night of the opening game against Cincinnati Royals in 1969. It was overwhelming. You have to learn how to act, how to conduct yourself around these people, how to ingratiate yourself. What you are is a salesperson. You're a salesman, and you're selling yourself to the players, the coaches, administrators. So, and you got to present and sell yourself. They have to gain credibility. So I had to get credibility from not just what I wrote, but how I was day to day with these people. So the first year was all expository, it was all learning about all this and getting, and finding out all these other writers, the veterans on the other beat that knew these guys, they had a huge head start on me. Incident, I mentioned this in the book, I believe, that kind of crystallizes, where I was starting from and as opposed to where I was and where I wanted to get to. About a month in, my idol, literally the guy I would like to have been, and I thought when I was 20, this is who I want to be when I'm 30, I'm 40. Frank DeFord of Sports Illustrated comes in to do a story on the Russell, post-Sam Jones Celtics and how they're faring and what they're like and this and that. One day while he's there, I look into the training room and Larry Siegfried is sitting in the hot tub, and they're perched over, with his notebook, because it was before the tape recorder days of 96, is Frank DeFord chatting and interviewing Larry Siegfried. And he knew all these guys because he had covered the playoffs for a couple of years, including that wonderful run they had in 69 when Russell, wins out the farewell. They win the balloon game in the Forum and all that, So, and I'm sitting there going, someday I want to be the guy, interviewing the guy in the hot tub.
I remember being that age, being around the NFL beat and just feeling totally overwhelmed too. Like, who are these people? They don't know me. You have to earn credibility. And it was frightening many days.
After the game, I'm making the rounds in the locker room, to get in the interviews. And I approach one of the players on the Royals. And as I'm doing so, and he's talking, it's like this thing came over me. Oh my God, I'm talking to Oscar Robertson.
The big O.
And that was, I felt, I was like, what? I'm talking to Oscar Robertson. This is like, it's surreal.
So tell me about the NBA then, because not only is it new to you to cover a team, you're going into an NBA league that is way different than what it is today. Tell me about that first year. What was the NBA like? I think they had like 8 staffers, including the commissioner. That was it? 8 staff people? Yes. The first NBA guide, I got my NBA guides behind me on the shelf, and the one for 1969-70, the entire front office listings are 8 people. And by the way, 3 of whom are secretaries. You have a commissioner, an assistant, the head of officials, and publicity. That's 4. I forget the 5th, and then 3 secretaries. And that was the entire league front office. 14 teams. And 14 teams. They would expand at the end of that year for the the Buffalo, Portland, Cleveland deal. But 14 doubleheaders in the East particularly, but not just the East. Plenty of neutral sites all over the place. And all teams playing new games. The Celtics themselves were still playing in Providence. Later, they switched that to Hartford right through the 80s, the late 80s. Okay, and they were only drawing like 7,000. Yeah, the Celtics were having about 7,000, and then maybe if Wilt came in, they might bang it out, or the Lakers, and that's it. And then the Knicks, because the Knicks would do well because of the Boston, the New York City oriented college students would come to the Garden for the Knicks. And those were like college games because there was actually about a 2/3, 1/3 cheering ratio. There'd be a lot of cheers when the Knicks scored a basket. About a third of the building was cheering for the Knicks because they were all these New York college kids. That's amazing. When you think about it, this stood out to me. You're covering the defending NBA champions, winners of 11 of the last 13 NBA championships. You're on the beat, and you don't cover the road games. No. You actually had to stay in the office and listen to the radio, and then Tommy Heinsohn, the coach, would call you? So what I would do, and this went on until the 72-73 season. For 2 years I did this for the most part. I would it was on TV. They did get a TV contract with Channel 27 in Worcester in January of 1970. So occasionally there'd be a game on. But roughly it was otherwise radio. And the great legendary Johnny Most was the announcer. And he took homerism to heights unprecedented or unsurpassed, and you couldn't rely on the honesty and a sense of descriptions, that Johnny Most calling the game. So you had to kind of run it through a filter, So I'm listening to the game and I'm keeping a running of the game. And after the game, I write the game story, off the radio. And then
for the evening story, Heinsohn would call me, and he never missed a call, like a high school coach going back to the small town paper. He would call me, and I would interview him, and I would write my PM story off of that interview with him, and he would call me.
The coach of the defending NBA champions is calling you at the Boston Globe office to tell you what happened in the game so you could write your story.
To tell me his version of the game, yeah.
What I think it shows, though, is it obviously shows the growth and explosion of basketball as a sport, the NBA as a game. I think where it came from, you were there at the grassroots of popularity for the NBA.
I mean, sure, the game, the league was on the not the back burner, but it wasn't in the forefront at all. And they needed that Knicks team. I'm telling you, they helped propel the league forward. And then it expanded. Plus geographically now they're expanding. You got it's 17 teams. But then again, you're in competition now with the ABA all this time, and that was a whole other story. But no, the NBA, I did watch it grow, and then of course the visionary aspect of moving on from J. Walter Kennedy to Larry O'Brien, and then eventually to David Stern. Yep. That jumps the story a whole decade, and that's a whole other matter.
Well, let's talk about this. You did 3 different stints on the Celtics beat, really up until 1988. You also had time there where you were covering the league. So you can't talk about the Celtics without talking about Red Auerbach.
No.
So tell me a little bit about, first of all, I want to ask you this. What was up with the cigar? What was that all about?
He smoked a bunch of cigars every day of his adult life. Now, this is before, I didn't cover Red as a coach. Naturally, he retired in 1966. I got to know Red and his guys as, Mr. Celtic, as the president and general manager. But, and got to know him, pretty well. But it was an arrogant thing. There's no question. Look, when I noticed, I grew up rooting, insofar as I was interested in the NBA, as opposed to college, which was my first love in the wintertime. I was rooting for Philadelphia. I was rooting against him. And so I was one of the people that was, fuming about Red and that arrogance. Yeah, the victory cigar, when he thought the game was in hand, he treated himself, lit up a cigar. And it became a real big symbol. People wanted to, talked about wanting to smash it in his face and tell me. I don't know what other coach and what other sport or manager of baseball had anything comparable in any act that he did to signify, the game's over, we won, screw you,
What was Red like to deal with? What kind of person was he, and what made him successful? He was
first of all, he's a very bright man who I think had he applied himself, it could have been a military general, it could have been a CEO. He was nobody's fool. He was a smart guy. He loved basketball. Period. I mean, not period, but he loved basketball. And he was brash. I mean, he was cocky. He certainly didn't lack for self-confidence. You know how he got started in the NBA. He was 28 years old. He had just come out of the Navy. The NBA, it wasn't the NBA, it was the Basketball Association of America. It was just founded in 1946. One of the franchises is the Washington Capitals, and he talks himself into the job by telling owner Mike Uline that I can get players. I got contacts. He had some of them. Seriously, some of them. He was a guy who would coach prep school in Washington, D.C. before he went in the Army. But he had contacts, and he did. He won the league. He won the regular season that first year. They got beaten in the playoffs. In the first championship with Philadelphia. But he got beaten in the playoffs, but he won the regular season and set a record of consecutive games, that lasted a long time, So he was damn good at what he did. One day he says to me, "Who's the greatest sixth man in the history of the NBA?" And I said, "Oh, I guess Havlicek." No. I'm thinking, well, okay, he's going to say Frank Ramsey, right? Frank Ramsey. No. Well, wow, the only other sixth man that I even knew about in those days was Ernie Vanderway, Kiki's father. I said, Ernie no. He said, Cheeky Shapiro. Said, who's Cheeky Shapiro? He said, he was the timer in Rochester.
That's great.
Isn't that great?
All right, you mentioned John Havlicek, and John was a player on the first team that you covered, and you covered him throughout the rest of his career in the 70s. As a child, growing up, John Havlicek was one of my all-time favorite players. Tell us about Havlicek, the person, and Havlicek, the player. How did he treat you when you were a rookie writer, and then how did that relationship evolve over the years?
To paraphrase what they said about Vince Lombardi. He treats everybody the same. Like Henry Jordan said, like dogs. John Havlicek was the flip side. He treated everybody with dignity and respect and courtesy. And I mean everybody, a local radio guy, a college kid doing a term paper, the most famous sports writers in America that knew him. He was unfailingly accessible and polite and incisive. You couldn't have, he was a dream. For me, he was, I won't say the only lifeline, but he was the primary one starting that first year. As time went on, I obviously developed deeper, other friendships and other sources, Paul Silas notably, but Don Nelson and Satch as well, but John was, first of all, John, in 1969, I'm about to say something that a lot of people are going to say, he's just a homer, he's just a Boston guy, he's just being parochial. He was the best player in the league, all right? By 1969, Oscar was in the league for 10 years. Jerry was in the league. They came in the same year, 60, 61. They're in their ninth year. And they're peaked. Both of them, they peaked. They're wonderful players, but they had peaked. John has not peaked. John is about to shed the six-man label and become the best all-around player in the league. And that's what he was for the next 3 years, at least. And so I get this inordinate pleasure as a basketball fan of watching him play every night and being able to honor of reporting on it, and then getting to know him and going out with him and had dinner with him and just getting to know him and getting his insights. And he taught me, a lot, and observations, and, he was a source. There's no question.
Let's talk Dave Cowens, because that's a player from the 1970s that I have a personal connection with, simply because Dave went to my high school, Newport Catholic in Newport, Kentucky, right across the river from Cincinnati. I actually went to high school with his two brothers, his twin brothers.
Oh, okay.
Their names were Tom and Jerry, like the cartoon characters, and they both played on our high school's basketball team. But Cowens, his photo was behind the basket at my high school gym, and he's a legend in our hometown. But I think he meant a lot to you too, right?
The easiest question I ever get at a speaking thing is, who's your favorite player to cover? I say, best player was Bird, and Havlicek's 1A. But my favorite was Dave Cowens. I've never ever counted anything like him, nor I don't think there's anyone else, because the combination of A, Hall of Fame talent, B, electrifying style, a unique style, and C, for me, an unmatched intellectual curiosity. Not to say he's a raging intellectual, but he's a curious person, and he's an open-minded person, and he's open to new adventures and new thoughts, and used to go around and ask me questions, and you don't get that too often. And
didn't he once drive a cab in Boston when he was playing?
Well, that was after when he went on his little sabbatical. There's nobody has a resume like Dave Cowens. I mean, what happened was he left the team in the 77-78 season. They had traded Paul Silas, that he couldn't come to contractual satisfaction in Boston, and they traded him to Denver, and they got Curtis Rowe, and then of course we got Sidney Wicks and the reparations. A long story. Anyway, he missed Silas badly on the court and off the court. And he just lost his desire. He just couldn't bring what he wanted to bring. And he didn't want to play if he wasn't going to be 100% into it. And so he did this month and a half sabbatical. And one of the things he didn't do it regularly, but he actually did at least one night or two drive a cab. And that's true. Of course, it's the same guy that spent the night after they won the championship in 1974, and then that Sunday afternoon in Milwaukee, we had flown back to Boston after the game, and he spent the night going around to different places and wound up, what the hell, here's a park bench in the Boston Common. I'll spend a couple of hours sleeping it off here. So he did, in fact, spend time sleeping in the
He
park.
would have fit in with sports writers. In 1980, you're in Indiana for a preseason game, and you're in your hotel with the Celtics, and you get a knock on your door. What happened?
It's noontime. I had come back from the morning shoot around. They were on an exhibition swing, anchoring in Terre Haute at the Larry Bird Boston Connection Hotel, by the way, and going to play a game that night in Evansville, about an hour and a half, 2 hours down US 41. And had played the night before in Indianapolis, and Dave hadn't played very well. but he wasn't playing real well in his exhibitions. And I was a little worried about it. With he just didn't look himself. So I go to the morning shoot around, and I'm back, and it's noontime or so, and I'm on the phone talking to Silas, who's down in Seattle, and he's telling me about the night before, about a game-winning basket by Dennis Johnson, and how he and DJ and Gus Williams were in competition. They were trying to one up each other all the time, and he just thought that was kind of funny but disturbing as well. Anyway, I'm talking to Silas. Knock, knock, knock. I open the door, and there's Dave Cowens is standing there with his practice uniform on, number 18, green shirt, holding yellow legal pad, papers, a sheaf of papers, 4-5, okay? I said, what's up? Come on in. I said, I'm talking to Silas. You want to say hello? So he did. So he chats with Silas. Okay, what's up, Dave? Read this. Oh, my God, I'm reading it. It's a retirement statement. He's retiring, right here and there. And I'm reading this whole thing he has written out, explaining whys and wherefores and why he's retiring. Well, what do you want from me? Well, I forget the exact phrasing, but it was basically, can you go over it and edit it? Fix it up if it needs fixing up, edit it. And I said, well, yeah, I can do that. And I said, but I got to have this story for the afternoon paper because, you understand that. So that's fine, no problem. I'll get it in the paper. And I said, it'll take me about an hour. And I knew he could write. He had written something for the Globe. He was literate. He could write. He actually, it wasn't going to be a difficult editing chore. And on the way out, he turns around and says, oh, do you mind if I call Red first?
He hadn't told Auerbach?
No. But the way he put it, I'll never forget it. Do you mind if I call Red first? No, Dave, I don't think I mind that at all. So
yeah, I think you had to tell Red Auerbach.
Here's the conversation. Mary Faherty was Red's secretary. Hey, Mary, it's Dave. Can I talk to Red? Red, it's Dave. Remember what we talked about the other night? Well, I'm doing it. Okay, I'll see you back in Boston. Click. That's not the end of the story. Now it's 4:00 in the afternoon, and the bus is ready to leave for Evansville. Dave comes down like George Washington addressing the troops at Valley Forge. He gets on the bus to tell the players. They didn't know. And he announces that, and he goes up to Parrish, who was playing like horse shit at the time, and gives him a little pep talk. You can do it. You're going to be fine. Don't worry. That kind of thing. And M.L. Carr, forever the team comedian, says, all right, you through? He said, yeah. Well, then get the F off our bus then. So now the bus pulls away, and I'm standing there with him. What's up? Well, I'm going home, going back to Newport. Okay. But being Dave, he didn't have any money or credit cards worth anything on him.
How's he going to get there?
Well, that's where I come in. I rent the Avis and hand him the keys. I rented the car.
You rented a car for Dave Cowens?
Yeah, and then handed him the keys. And he says on the way back, he went to a funeral somewhere. Well, he may have. He went to a funeral, and then he went home, and that's just, as they say, is history.
That is a great one.
From DNA testing to the Dixie Mafia, Crime Capsule brings you new stories of true crime in American history. I'm your host, Benjamin Morris. Join us for exclusive interviews with authors from Arcadia Publishing, writing the hottest books on the most chilling stories of our country's past. You can find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts or on evergreenpodcasts.com. Crime Capsule. History so interesting, it's criminal.
There was another player, came from the state of Indiana, joined the Celtics, and he was on that team as a rookie, I believe.
Yeah, Larry Bird. Yes, another and rather significant figure in my journalistic life. That's the reason why we were in Terre Haute to start with,
Right.
They were going to play, because of Larry, they were going to milk the state of Indiana. They were going to play in Indianapolis and at ISU and at Evansville, which they did. So we were staying at the Larry Bird Boston Connection Hotel, naturally, in Terre Haute.
Now, you went on to write a book with Larry, My Drive. I highly recommend it. Another great read. There's so many things we could talk about with Larry. One thing I wanted to ask you quickly was, what's always fascinated me about Bird is when he came into the league, he was very shy, reticent, didn't really speak to the media. By the time he left, he was a great quote. How did he change over the years? Tell me about Larry Bird, the person that you got to know and deal with as a writer.
Basketball was very important, although he didn't latch on to basketball until like age 13. I mean, it wasn't like he liked baseball first. And but he grew, a little bit and discovered and fell in love with seeing that round ball go to that orange ring. He kind of liked that, it's a thing you could do by yourself and all that. He's a smart person. I used to kid him and say, what Larry Bird did, you have successfully evaded the American educational system. Now, he graduated from college and he did his teaching duties at student teaching thing at Indiana ISU. But even then, he still didn't, associate himself with intellectual pursuit. When he was playing for Indiana State, he knew he was the center of attention, and he was conscious of being a teammate, and he wanted. And then his stated reason for avoiding the media during that whole run in '79 was that he knew that they only wanted to talk to him, and he wanted to make sure that they talked to other people. So if he didn't talk at all, they'd have to talk to other people. Pretty smart. All right, so I'm going to fast forward to circa 1978. I wrote a magazine story for the Boston Globe Sunday magazine. I pitched him an idea about the blossoming of Larry Bird and how Larry Bird had grown up in public and had grown out. He couldn't avoid not showing off, but developing his personality and his instincts. And he long since gotten over about being wary of the media, embraced the media, knew how to handle the media, and actually liked being that. And I talked about how in those days there was a table that sat in the middle of the Celtics locker room. And what would happen was the game would be over, and then Larry would come out and sit on the edge of the table, and you would circle around him, and that would be and he would do his, and he told me for the story when I did the article that I looked up at the clock, and so I knew that they had deadlines and they didn't want to be there all night, and I knew I could give them like good 10, 12 minutes, and now that would do. They would be okay. It's exactly right. And it's exactly right, because, you can't hang there forever. But this time, in the evening papers were, distant memory by that time, So everybody had deadline,
But he was aware of that. He knew that. He knew what you needed to do your job.
And he was getting more and more, he had, obviously at this point, he had opinions about the league, and he could describe it. He enjoyed, he became comfortable with this interview thing. And then it was a very interesting, and he had good descriptions. And anyway, he grew up in public, and they all do. But, some of them don't handle it too well, and some of them do. But he always had more to offer up there intellectually, and that's what this was all about. But he was very wary in the beginning. Yeah, this.
For a guy who didn't talk, he was known as a great trash talker on the floor.
That he did. And then, and that developed along the way, too. He did. He was... by the way, we just passed an anniversary as we speak. On the 11th of February, 1981 was one of my favorite Bird games of all time. We were in Los Angeles, having just arrived a night before losing an overtime game in Seattle. And Tiny wasn't playing for some reason, Tiny Archibald. And we were delayed. This is the old days, no charters or anything. In the West Coast, you get a lot of fog in the winter. I don't know what happened. We didn't get to LA until 3:00 in the afternoon, and the game was at 7:30. Just even arrive at the LAX. So I didn't have very good feeling about that game. But when we got there, we found out Magic wasn't going to play. And Larry goes up to Magic, who was sitting around, before the game, and said, "Sit back, Irvin, and enjoy the show." Larry goes for 36 points, 21 rebounds, 6 assists, 5 steals, and at least 3 separate times there was a 3-on-1 break, and he broke it up. It was at that point, this is the middle of his second year, it was the best game he had yet played in the NBA. And it was just utterly and completely spectacular. And they won that game, without Tiny, which was a big deal. But Irvin, sit back and Irvin, enjoy the show.
Well, you can't talk about Bird without talking about Magic, obviously, and you brought Irvin up. You actually saw Magic Johnson and Larry Bird play. You covered 29 Final Fours, I believe.
Yes.
You covered the 1979 Bird Magic. Michigan State defeats Indiana State. That was really the game that I think college basketball just blew up after that game. It's still, I think, the highest rated.
It is the highest rated game
championship.
42 years later, and of course, it's never going to be surpassed. The game stunk. You know that. It wasn't much of a game. Indiana State Larry was hurt, and I'll get to that. And he shot 7 for 21, and he had 13 rebounds. And Magic, the better team won. Okay, right. Larry increased the growing legend. He went 16 for 19 in the semifinal game against DePaul, and then Michigan State crushed Penn. That's your last Ivy League team to go to the Final Four. And from the time the second game ended, I think that was the second game, but I'm not positive, on Saturday night until they tipped off on Monday night, which now is 9:22 Eastern. I don't know what time we were the night of 79, but maybe a little earlier, maybe not. Todd, that was the longest 2 days I ever spent in anticipation of an athletic event in my life. And I wasn't alone. There was such anticipation. Turned out the game was anticlimactic. Now, my version, and Larry is so honorable, he'll never admit it. He had hurt his hand early in the playoffs, in the tournament. I think against, I don't know, he did. He hurt his hand, his thumb. I think early in that game, I remember seeing him catch a pass and wince. And if you watch the tape of that game, of those 13 rebounds, I would say half minimum, and maybe 9 or 10, were one-hand scoops without using that other hand. And he was, if anything, a fundamentally perfectly sound player who always, in any other circumstance that I've ever seen him, would use the two hands. There was no showboat nature. There was no need. He couldn't use his left hand. And no, it wasn't a shooting hand, but he wasn't himself.
And that started it a year later. You're in the Spectrum, courtside, this rookie, Magic Johnson, once again. Now he's with the Lakers, and he puts on a performance in Game 6, filling in for injured Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, he jumped center. He did everything. Tell me what it was like in the Spectrum when Magic won that first NBA title.
We've got to back up a bit. That was a Game 6. And in Games 1 through 5, the MVP, unquestionably, was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And he gets hurt in Game 5. I don't know when he got hurt, but they lose Game 5 out there. So we're coming back for Game 6 in Philadelphia, and he's not playing. He didn't make the trip. And so I can tell you that we in the media, all we were talking about was where we're going to go for dinner when we go back to LA for Game 7. This is a Friday night game, and we're going to. I'm serious. Where are we going back? Where are we going to go for dinner on Saturday? Because we're going back for Game 7 on Sunday. Everybody knows that they're not beating the Lakers or the Sixers without Kareem, who had been the best player. I'm sitting behind the basket, first row, and in the first period of that game, Magic Johnson scored 5 field goals, none of which, as I recall writing, had anything to do with any of the other 4. In other words, it was just, it was a virtuoso, a hook, a base, a reverse, a post up, a face up, this and that. It was a virtuoso, 5 fascinatingly interesting different shots en route to what it turned out to be 42 points, 15 rebounds, 7 assists, as you know, playing in a sense, as much as we can differentiate among positions, which is overrated in basketball anyway, now, forever and more. But all 5, did he jump? Yeah, he jumped. Did he guard? He probably did guard somebody. Guarded the center, guarded the guard, guarded the forward. He's 20 years old, 20, 20 years old. It remains among the handful. I don't have to go any farther than that. 5 best performances I have ever seen in all the years I covered the NBA. And it was it was 20 years old. So that legend was cemented that night for sure. Then, of course, they give him the MVP, which I screamed about because, no, I know that he won that game, but Kareem was the first 5 games. There was no argument. But anyway, I often have problems disputing the MVPs, like in 2010 when they
no, Bob, you have a problem with things?
When they stole it from Pau Gasol and gave it to Kobe, which is ridiculous. But anyway, that's another matter.
But that night started it all. It was Bird Magic from there on.
And they would play 31 times as well, which is great. And I was the only story I ever wrote. I wrote a couple advertising supplements, but I ever wrote for Sports Illustrated. They honored me, tremendously by asking me to write this cover story on Bird Magic rivalry, after Larry retired, and I did, and so we researched. They really researched a lot of stuff. I was able to research a lot of stuff. What I'm going to say is that just as digression, it's the greatest individual matchup rivalry of the last 30 years. Michael Thompson referred to them as the salt and pepper of the NBA. Isn't that great? That was great. Yeah, it was too good to be true matchup. And they both were each other's biggest fan. And when Magic announced to the world that he was HIV positive, he called Larry that day. And when Larry retired, the first person outside of Boston he called, tell him it was Magic. And then, it's all for real. There's no stage phoniness. They have a bond, truly.
And then you mentioned him. Michael Jordan comes in.
They set the table for Michael.
Right.
Michael took it over to finish. They went into the red zone. Okay, Bird and Magic took the NBA into the red zone, got it down to maybe the 5. Michael took him into the end zone, and where it is today. He said, you can't deny it.
And his first big pro moment was dropping 63 in the Garden in the playoffs.
The end of his second year, this was the true coming out party.
Yeah.
Sunday afternoon, national television, the Celtics, the greatest team of all time before the three-point mania took hold, the 85-86 Celtics, and he almost beats them. It took Celtics 2 overtimes, 135-131. He missed the last shot of one of the regulation overtimes, or else, he had a chance. 63. It was what a day that was. Oh my God. That was
and away we go.
That, Todd, for us, it was a Sunday afternoon with a 1:00 start, which meant that we could write it. We could research the hell out of it. We could write it. And this is a gospel truth. I'm not making this one up. I know nobody believes me. But the game started at 1. And at approximately 8:30 Eastern, we, being the entire Boston press corps and the Chicago press corps, we all walked out of the Garden together and went out to eat together down at the Faneuil Hall in Boston. And we were there for 7.5 hours and wrote just emptied it out.
Those were the moments, right? When something spectacular happened and you were able to witness it and chronicle it, and then you could go out with your fellow writers and just relive it and talk about it. Those were the moments of being a writer.
Absolutely. One
last basketball thing. Magic and Bird set the table. Jordan comes in, and it just goes crazy from there. The NBA blows up, and then you get to the point where it becomes international.
Yeah.
And you have the Dream Team. The 92 Barcelona Olympics. And you were there every step of the way for the Dream Team, right?
The Dream Team was the brainchild of Boris Stankovic, the president of FIBA, the international governing basketball body. The NBA got involved in international basketball, and he wanted to have the American pros involved in the competitions, namely the World Championships and the Olympics, to raise the bar for everybody else, to show the world where they need to be, what the pinnacle of basketball was, where you need to be.
The Dream Team had to be like being with the Beatles in '64 when they came to New York.
It was. That's right. It was very similar to that. When they were staying in a 4-star hotel or 5-star hotel in Barcelona. They had great security. They weren't in the Olympic Village. We've never gone to the Olympic Village, our basketball teams. But anyway, they were everywhere they went, and it was a huge. It started, of course, in Portland, Oregon, at the Tournament of the Americas, where we had to qualify. And that's where the whole thing took root. The very first game was against Cuba. And before the game, the Cubans asked to have a team photo taken. They weren't into illusions about who's going to win the game. They wanted to have a joint photo taken. And that became the ritual. Okay? That became the ritual of the theme of the entire postseason, of the entire Tournament of the Americas. And to the Olympics, it was, the ritual of the other team taking a picture. My favorite moment in the Tournament of the Americas, we're playing Argentina. And they had a 6'5" guard who was pretty good, named Marco Milanesio. And Marco finds himself on a switch with Magic, and Magic is now guarding him, on a post up on a baseline near their bench. And as he's posting up Magic, he's pointing and waving to the bench, yelling, "Fotografia, fotografia." It was a fabulous experience. I absolutely, and I got to be very friendly with Oscar Schmidt, the great Brazilian, and
he has 50,000 career points. I mean,
he's the all-time international scorer. Scored more points than anybody in any league, any world. He was.
I must point this out though, Bob. You were there every step of the way. La Jolla, California, Monte Carlo, and Barcelona. That's not a bad road trip.
I said that was the greatest boondoggle summer of my life.
Well, like we talk so much basketball, and I've kept you quite a while here, but I did want to point out, you became a full-time columnist at the Globe in '89, so you covered everything. 11 Olympics. I think golf was your favorite sport to cover.
I love covering golf. People say, "What's your favorite sport to cover?" Expecting me to say baseball or basketball, and I say it's golf, and that's logistics. It's the one sport that TV can't, I'll use the F word, TV can't fuck up.
Yeah.
And because they have to play it in daylight, which means that you're going to have deadlines, pressures off except on Saturday, because you have the early edition on Sunday.
And you can be right there. Well, I was fortunate enough to go to St. Andrews when Jack Nicklaus played his last British Open, and I walked all 18 holes with Nicklaus and Tom Watson, the pairing. Yep. And I think to myself, I'm standing here walking with Nicklaus and Watson.
Yeah, no,
that's kidding me. At the birthplace of golf.
I loved getting out there. One of the most 5 greatest days I ever had covering anything. My favorite memorable days was the Sunday afternoon of the Ryder Cup in 1999 when we came from behind and beat the Europeans. And there was madness all over the place at the country club.
You see Justin Leonard's putt, like with your own eyes?
The famous putt. I have a story. Glad you asked.
You have a story?
I was trailing.
Really, Bob?
This is the famous Justin Leonard putt in the 17th we're talking about, right? And the people come out and they run on the green, and Olafable's upset because they're stomping on his line and the whole thing. Okay. I was walking primarily with the group that was behind him. So I'm down the fairway, and I see a guy sitting in an NBC golf cart about 100 yards below the green. Oh, hello, Michael. It was Michael Jordan. So I watched that. We watched, and he doesn't, I'm guaranteed he doesn't remember, but that's, that we watched that Justin Leonard scenario together from the NBC golf cart. So these are the memories that, I'm so grateful I was able to live this life. I mean, these are the things they're not remotely in your mind when you start. You just want a job. You just want to write. But the byproduct of it is I'm so grateful.
We really are grateful for your time. And this is what we're trying to capture. We're trying to capture writers and their careers and just get these oral histories of these moments and these things that are part of a life, and you were able to bring this to readers and viewers. And we were a conduit to places, to people who couldn't be in the places that we were at. And you've been at so many great places and have shared such great stories.
I always say, and I say this with all sincerity, I am so grateful I did it when I did it, because the circumstances were different. And the experiences that we had in our time many of them are not available. So I'm so grateful, not to mention doing it in Boston for a receptive audience in a town that loves sports. So anyway, thank you for having me. It's been fun to go, do a little reminiscence.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks for listening to Press Box Access. You can find us here with a new episode every other Wednesday. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and follow us on Apple Podcast or on your favorite podcast app. We'd love for you to review us. 5 stars would be nice. Follow us on social media. Drop us an email at pressboxaccess@gmail.com. And be sure to spread the word. Everyone is welcomed here. This has been a production of Evergreen Podcast. A special thank you to executive producers Michael D'Aloia and Gerardo Orlando, producer Sarah Wilgrube, and our audio engineer Dave Douglas. I'm your host, Todd Jones. It's closing time. Rock on.
From DNA testing to the Dixie Mafia, Crime Capsule brings you new stories of true crime in American history. I'm your host, Benjamin Morris. Join us for exclusive interviews with authors from Arcadia Publishing, writing the hottest books on the most chilling stories of our country's past. You can find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts or on evergreenpodcasts.com. Crime Capsule. History so interesting, it's criminal.